Before it was MAGA. We're all glad, a lot of us are glad that Trump is out, but we can't use that to allow ourselves to relax on the realities of what America continues to be and has been. Because otherwise it won't be what it needs to be, right? MAGA, Making America Great, has always been the mantra for this country. Actually, it was an official statement from Ronald Reagan 30 years before Donald Trump. And even when it wasn't used as words, there was always empire. There was always oppression of indigenous peoples and people of color. And it was always this fraudulent pseudo worship of Jesus Christ being used to kind of veil what the true religion, the true devotion was, which was power.
Every person in the United States should watch that footage, see that reality, and watch it again. This is what the coordinated mob was doing. It wasn't one person or two. It wasn't a fringe group within the crowd. It was the main activity among a large crowd assembled outside. Now, some people did yell out not to hurt the officer, but the thrust of the crowd was trying to beat or kill an officer while chanting USA.
Yeah. Yo. All the things we learn, right? Yo, I pledge allegiance to the bag the United States of America has. Peep the stance ain't where it stands, and saw inside the bag was the mind of man. So we blood sacrificed the MAGA. I guess there wasn't enough bloodletting for my offer. What in the cultic saga? White Christian Americans, deists found in paupers, deified dollars, make America God again. The freedom fetish rhetoric without charges of fraudulence. Pray to make America's grand audience re-believe the deflection of us at our naughtiest. Trump made America the gaudiest again. He's angsty white folks, golden calf, taking desert chances, waiting on the tablets. They about to make America go accurate. With fake fatigue, lean at risk to fascists, brown fear bastion, set up for white entrapment. Neo-Nazis and retro hate make America again. 3K state. Hey yo, how you throw your MAGA down? How you MAGA, how you flip it, how it turn you out? Banging MAGA, set tripping. Nation falling down, affiliation of the sets, MAGA pushing round. How you MAGA, tell me how you throw your MAGA down. How you MAGA, how you flip it, how it turn you out. Banging MAGA, set tripping nation falling down. Affiliation of the sets, MAGA pushing round. How you MAGA. So we blood sacrificed the MAGA. I guess there wasn't enough bloodletting for my opera. They're cooking up chaos in the culinary seance. Peace with no beast is the patriot's mantra. Great ain't always good, peep the construct. Great Depression, Great War, empires beyond lust. Astrophysics say that we all made of star stuff. How that star behind bars become a slave for Starbucks. We make America go arduous for money, avarice, greed. The mag bag a part of us. Citizenship is pound. Money, guns, and the bag, right? And then maybe a little later, some God in there. Maybe you could try to fuse the idea of God with those things to produce this perverted pseudo worship that's not really the God that's in the Bible, right? We always had this. Oh, y'all thought this was over, huh? Oh, okay. MAGA was MAGA before it was MAGA. Yo, penny for my thoughts, pence for oppression, aces for my backup, Trump for aggression, pesos for a border wall, billions for the trafficking, coyotes farming products, rules over management. Cesspools that need exorcisms, deep state, shallow state, dog, there are no schisms. Same pool, same chlorine, war machines, unholy ghosts giving white folks they morphine. Super heretical, pseudo-evangelicals claim light of the world, but they tint wild helical. They trying to resurrect the night ride. All NAGA members stand down and stand by. It's puncturing your fragility, disturb your tranquility. Rather feed your hostility than starve the villainy. Watching Amy Goodman, thinking about the youth pooping on Bay and Goodman in the box that they pushed in. How you MAGA with a red hat, white lettering, or no hat, but when you get triggered, you snap back. This is brown in the great melanated aboriginals gotta assimilate and red, ride or die. Trump made America bang again. Blue slump ready to make America bang again. MAGA Maba made America's global anatomy, but muscular America is cold game action. Hey, yo, how you throw your MAGA down? How you MAGA, how you flip it, how it turn you out? Bang your MAGA, set tripping nation falling down. Affiliation of the sets, MAGA pushing round. How you MAGA, tell me how you throw your MAGA down. How you MAGA, how you flip it, how it turn you out? Bang your MAGA, set tripping nation falling down. Affiliation of the sets, MAGA pushing round. How you MAGA? So we blood sacrifice to MAGA, sweat and tears included, the truly salty product, new flavor, sustainable taste for new constructs. We making America go against the monstrous, atrocious, ghastly, apathy, MAGA combo, corruption, casualties, duopoly bangs, removed from artery veins, medicated Americans giving antidotes change. Bees and hornets now co-own the beehive. We call the United States when the wasp used to deny. But I gotta ask, will honeycombs turn wrong? Cause pyromaniac kings tend to burn their own thrones. Charlemagne said it's supported 8-bit. I'm no Freud, but elected the country's heads what we did. Cloaking it just made America the greatest actor. Golden globalist, the more they notice it, it will collapse. Hey yo, how you throw your MAGA down? How you MAGA, how you flip it, how it turn you out? Bang your MAGA, set tripping nation falling down. Affiliation of the sets, MAGA pushing round. How you MAGA, tell me how you throw your MAGA down. How you MAGA, how you flip it, how it turn you out. Bang your MAGA, set tripping nation falling down. Affiliation of the sets, MAGA pushing round. How you MAGA? Pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America.
All right. Welcome, everybody, and welcome to my guest, Brandon White, who you just saw his video of How You MAGA. And welcome to everyone. This is Pain to Power Leading with Love. I am Brown Girl Interrupting, and I'm really excited to have my very special guest and colleague and friend, Brandon White, here with us today to share his story of pain to power and some of the amazing things he's working on. You just saw his video. But he's going to tell us a little bit more about him and his story. So welcome, Brandon.
Thanks, Maria. I appreciate the warm welcome. So glad to be on Brown Girl Interrupting.
Thank you. Like I really appreciate your time and your talents in this space, obviously, right? So I love the video. And I think we're going to get into the video a little bit more in a few moments, but it kind of frames, I think, our whole conversation here, which is a lot of what we're talking about is the idea of the education system being painful. And it's bigger than just the system of education, but I know that's where your energy is focused, and that's what we're going to talk about. But that pain has been taken and created into some types of power through the way that I know you've approached education and some of the different projects that you have. And so that's why you're here, because you're leading with love through all of those. So just people don't know you. So introduce yourself a little bit and say a little bit about just who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into it.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Brandon White. As my shirt says, I hail from Rochester, New York, born in DC, but raised in Rochester. I am an educator, a classroom educator, but also was a restorative practices coordinator and also was a site coordinator for the Freedom School Summer Literacy Program. For those who are big Freedom School fans or heads or know about that program, it's a major program in terms of helping people see the value of reading and learning. If you look like me, and so that experience is, you know what I'm talking about, that the most out of all it definitely shows up in the center of my compass the most, or excuse me, is often my true north in terms of how I think about education. And I currently work for Unbound Ed as a ELA specialist. And throughout all these professional walks, I've always been like a MC and a poet and a writer. So that's me. That's me.
I love it. And you left out that you are the producer of some podcasts, which is
Oh yeah,
is
that's kind of
pretty dope.
important. Yeah, that's kind of important. Yes. Through Unbounded, I have generated 2 podcast series, one limited, one ongoing. The one that is limited is called The Complexion of Teaching and Learning. It's a podcast docuseries that chronicles the challenges and contributions that educators of color have brought to the American education system, where I've had to deal with as a result of the American education system. So glad that got finished and is a complete project for people to dive in and see themselves or see others in and become better actors or recipients of American education. And then the second one is called the LP, Literature in Practice, which I take some time to talk with authors of books who focus on trying to make sure that instruction in schools is grade level, engaging, affirming, and meaningful. In other words, just making sure that the child is having instructional experiences that are rigorous, but also relevant to who they are and where they are in their walk on earth. So that just launched this week. And I'm really excited about that too. Lorena Herman was our first guest. She wrote the book Texture Teaching. And she was a really great, fun first guest to kick it off with. So thank you for reminding me to talk about the things that are going on. And I think that might actually stem from some pain that around I guess like promotion and confidence and self-doubt. So I'm sure we'll dig into that a little bit too, because that routinely happens. Like, yeah, this is who I am, whatever. Like, you know, and it's okay to like not. I think it is important to not oversell yourself. You know how some people are like, I am the this and I am the that. Like that's annoying to me, but that doesn't mean you got to swing the other way and be like, yeah, I'm Brandon, I'm from Rochester, right? Like,
it's a fine line. I think it's a fine
is.
line, right? Between confidence and knowing who you are and what you're capable of and what your contribution is, I think most importantly, right? So like everything you're doing is really for others. It's not like aggrandizing Brandon and like Brandon's story, right? It's to empower others. So there's a lot of greatness in that. But I get it. I think as a creator, it's easy to kind of like that feeling of like you need to not be as vocal about the things you create because it can seem like you're pushing things onto people, or that you think more of yourself than you should. And I think honestly, you can't please everybody. Some people are still going to probably say it right.
100%.
But yes, that pain piece definitely plays into, and the way we're raised and our culture and our experiences, right? Of like, when do I speak about myself and when do I not, right? So speaking of that, all of these things are very much your tools that you are creating for educators to be better at what they're doing. But let's go back a little bit, because I want to talk a little bit more about every educator started as a student. And so
100%.
in thinking about you as a student, your experiences, like what if that has been maybe your moments of pain, but also have been just your experiences and what that was like going through schooling for you?
Yeah. First, I want to say 2 contradictory things. One, in terms of my personal experience, when I think about what the average Black male experiences in the education system, I know I've had a lot of privileges as somebody who went through majority accelerated programs for the majority of my school experiences, having 2 parents with degrees, and also growing up in a socioeconomically stable neighborhood like the South Wedge in Rochester, New York. I understand that there's a lot of privileges I had. With that being said, the contradiction here is one thing I've noticed growing up is
Sometimes when you know you've had privileges, you put yourself in an odd space where you don't necessarily want to complain about some of the things that you've experienced because you know you've had it good, but then they were legitimate experiences. So you don't that kind of trying to play hot potato with yourself around what to do, what to say is hard or like allows it to kind of stay and not necessarily be processed, right? So I think for me, going through life and reaching points in my later years where I can be like, you know what, there are a lot of privileges I did have, but it's okay to name some of the things that weren't okay. Like, so for the most part, I haven't necessarily been vocal about like some of the challenges in my education because I know that I was tracked for having high expectations. But it wasn't always like that because when I first started school, I had a terrible school experience in kindergarten. Like my teachers were like undeniably racist. I was like the only black kid in that particular kindergarten program, and like the way that she would engage me versus the other kids in terms of like what I got punished for versus the other kids in terms of what was expected of me um, instructionally or academically. It was very marginalized, and I really hated going there. And actually, the poet part of me, the rapper part of me, developed a song called "Letter to My Kindergarten Teacher," and I said, "You were the first adult in my life I couldn't trust. Was taught stranger danger, but teacher danger was enough." Because like and again, that's the privilege too, right? Where the majority of the people, I wasn't around like people who were like predators or people who were terrible people growing up, at least up to that age, right? Like, I had people that cared about me, and I wasn't exposed to any shady or shifty people until I got into a classroom, and that says a lot. Now it didn't stay that way, thank goodness. But I think again, having the foundation I had, like if I didn't have the foundation I had at home, that might have poisoned my perception of what school is and will forever be, right? So that's how it started, but it ended up developing into different things when I went to different schools. The elementary school I went to, I had a great time, and it was a great place for me in terms of like having a consistent place, because that was also a time my parents were splitting. So like having that background where you're just like thoroughly accepted and appreciated and still pushed, because sometimes what teachers will do is, oh, I know that this child is going through a hard time, so therefore I will not have these expectations, which is just as hurtful if you weren't considering what the child was going through at all. And so for me particularly, two teachers come to mind, Miss Thompson then and Miss Gerace then too. Like they obviously cared, but like they were still going to push and have expectations with flexibility, right? And like it was like my little triangular universe. I had the elementary school there, the library right next door, which my mother actually worked at for some time, and then the rec center in the back. Like this triangle was like a big triangle of emotional safety and belonging. And then, but at the same time, especially as I got into middle school, because I did not have the typical experience of a lot of black males in Rochester, like I was different. Grew up on a different side for the most part than other folks who looked like me of the city. Could be into different things, had a different affect. So when you have that different affect in our community, sometimes, especially in the 90s or early 2000s, like it's hard for you to figure out where you land, right? In terms of
Mm.
like your peer group, right? I've actually spoken to my wife about this, and she said, she asked me, what do you think would have happened if you didn't grow up in the neighborhood that I grew up in?
Mm.
I said, all my friends probably wouldn't be black weirdos. because like because I think all my best friends are black men who don't fit the stereotypical mold. I have obviously I have black friends who, you know, like probably can fit in within the general black public a little bit better than I can. But like my best ones are those are the kind of relationships that resonate with me the most, because you know what it's like to be, you know, different in your own ethnic group, but also still othered in another ethnic group. You know what I'm saying? And so, you know, you navigate that, but you still try to stay true to who you are. And you know, I find hip hop along the way, and that gave me confidence and identity within what it means to be a learner and get educated outside of school. So yeah, I feel like I talked a lot, but
No,
this is your fault.
but
This is Brown Girl interrupting. This
this
is
is Brown
this
Girl
is
Roasting. That's what we do. I just like I let it out there, and then y'all just go.
yeah.
No, but like I think that you brought up some really key points, right? Like I mean the piece about one, I think the complexity of privilege, but also feeling marginalized at the same time is something that's really real, and I think you can't. Uh, Pain is something that is individual, right? So like
No.
there's no, it's not a comparison of how much someone has the pain or where that pain comes from or how great the pain is or how long even the pain is, right? If it impacted you, it impacted you, right? And clearly it did, right? You wrote a song. You wrote a song years and years
Yeah.
later. You wrote a
Yeah,
song
right,
about your
right. I'm a
kindergarten
grown,
teacher.
literally 30
That's
years
an
ago.
impact.
Yeah, yeah.
That's an impact, right? And that's your first experience with school. So like it becomes the relationship you also have with school. And fortunate for you, right? Like you were able to find other outlets and you were able to have better experiences. But like you said, right, not everybody has that. But at the same time, it sounds like you've taken a lot of that with you and then taken like the experiences of others that you've seen. And this has kind of been like your work's goal of what you've done with it. One, there's music, but then there's, like you said, you mentioned your podcast, you mentioned your work with Unbound Ed, and so much of what you did in Rochester school systems. So let's fast forward though, like because I think that's a lot of the story too. Is like, so what about when you started teaching? Did you realize about school and learning as you put these pieces together? Like, what was that experience like in your first few years, and just what what you noticed, particularly for your Black and brown boys and girls?
I knew I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. No matter how hard it got, especially year one, I knew I was doing what I was supposed to do. And when you're purposed and you're going through pain in that purpose, that pain feels different, right? It could be an extraordinary amount of pain or frustration or angst or whatever, but if you know you are where you're supposed to be, like it just, you're able to internalize it different. It still leaves its impact. I don't want to minimize it. But like it definitely, when I think about some of the things that how hard I worked, when I think about how hard I worked through so many things in that environment and in my own environment and through my own growing pains, because most people who start teaching don't really know themselves. If you're 20, early 20s, mid 20s, like I'm not saying that's true about everybody, but a lot of people do not know themselves in their early to mid 20s. And even in your 30s, you're still learning, right? So when you're still kind of developing as a human being, and you got to be responsible daily for like dozens and dozens and dozens, in my case, for because I'm a middle school teacher, dozens of other human beings that are kind of like, yeah. One thing I did learn, Mario, was that there isn't really a whole lot different between middle schoolers and like young adults and even regular adults. The middle schoolers just haven't learned how to like mask it. They haven't learned how to manage it, but they still deal with a lot of the things that adults deal with, young adults, especially 20s, 20s and up to 30s, and then even older adults. Like I would see parallels of behavior all the time, right? But just again, just they're a little bit more honest about their own behavior, and they also are they don't have the coping or managing skills that we try to develop. So that was one thing I learned. And then another thing I learned was, you know, like when you're in a situation like that, it really will bring up your professional and personal faults fast, right? Like I had a passion for teaching, but I also learned that I can get angry really fast, right? I also learned I can get really anxious, right? Like these are things I knew about myself, but like I didn't like it really didn't like get tested until like I was in that classroom, right? So when you're again trying to navigate that, and now when you navigate that, you try to make sure that that doesn't interfere with your process and your purpose, because your purpose is to be what what's her name, Dr. Love calls an abolitionist teacher. You want to make sure that education is a liberation move and not one that is a mental or even physically incarcerating move, right? Because you survived it. That's not common for who you are, right? And so now all these things are coming up in you that tempt you to be that same oppressor you're trying not to be. And in the micro moments that you fail at that, that's hard because you know what your purpose is, right?
Yeah.
You know what you want to do, but what you want to do and what your purpose is isn't always matching with what you're doing. And unless you're honest and go through that like hurtful reality, like, you know what, like when I kicked that kid out prematurely because I thought they were doing something, or I was not adequately supporting that English learner because I don't have the skill set yet. And so I kind of just waited a little bit to see if somebody would help him. And then when he ended up kind of goofing off, then I kicked him out or her out. Like that's me doing the very thing that I, committed to trying not to be and do. So when you're, a person of color going through the K-12 system, you knew what it was like, either based on your experiences or the experiences you've seen. And then to have to come back and then put those kind of behaviors, or demonstrate those kind of behaviors and be tempted to do that daily. Like that's a special kind of weight that I don't know if every educator carries, because their disposition with the K-12 system is different than black boys and girls, Latinx boys and girls, students with special needs, and English language learners. Like if you aren't in any of those buckets, and there might be a couple other buckets that I'm missing, but like if you're just middle of the road and you just went through it, like worrying about becoming your worst enemy is not always top of mind, and it's a unique type of fatigue, right? So it got fatiguing and got rewarding for sure, right? But it definitely had its fatiguing moments for sure too.
But that's really powerful. One, I think what you said is so big. Like the idea that, a lot of early educators don't know themselves and the impact that has on the classroom. Because I think for me, it comes back to the idea that really, as particularly as we're talking about all these things, like what we're talking about is how do we change the education system and really dismantle systemic racism in schools, right? Like how do we change the trajectory for our students with intentionality? And step one is we have to know ourselves. So and then the complexity I think that you raise, right, of like being someone who could so easily fall into the traps of what it is to be an educator and the narrative around that as a person of color, as a Black man, right? Like specifically, it becomes really complicated to hold all that. And I imagine that obviously you're not the only person, right, who feels that. There's a pressure and there's an unlearning, because as
Mhm.
educators, I think so much of it is unlearning what we experienced as as students, but also like of the things that we've been told is how you're supposed to teach kids, right? Like when you think about like teacher preparation, it's not really preparing educators
Yeah.
for what they need to make, like you said, like those micro decisions that impact a kid's world, that impact whether or not kids are in the school to prison pipeline, that impact whether or not they're missing whole chunks of learning because they're not even in the classroom anymore, right? Or if they don't even get the opportunity to learn, right? So I think that's all really powerful. And so I guess for me, my question for you is like, so what was it then that made that shift for you, that you were able to recognize, you know what, like I got to do this differently. I got to do school differently. I have to teach differently. And then how did you get to that point? Like what helped you to figure out, like you mentioned, right, abolitionist teaching and liberatory teaching, like it's for liberation. How did you get there?
Well, I think having that outlook from the beginning was very important. Like figuring out what that meant and what that looked like was a process and a journey. But I
Mm,
would say that I was definitely starting that journey from the beginning. I think maybe when I think of maybe like specific moments in that journey, um, some people, you know what I think? Some people start their education journey um, from like the academic standpoint and then figure out like the abolitionist piece, right? And then
mm.
figure out like the freedom fighting piece or the self-actualization piece, right? Um
So I'm gonna stop you there just for a second, just because I want to make sure that all of our audience is on point with your language, right?
oh
So
gosh, you see,
abolitionist
look what I'm
piece.
doing.
Tell me a
I'm
little bit more,
gatekeeping.
right?
I'm
That's what we do.
gatekeeping,
Educators
Maria.
do
Oh
that. We all
no.
go into our lingo and
Right.
like we talk like everybody knows all of the
Yes.
lingo
Thank you
of
for
the
naming that.
education system. So what is abolitionist teaching? Like what is the
Yeah.
the theory behind that, the mindset that you're referring to, so that everybody's on the same page here?
Yeah, no, for sure. Abolitionist teaching is basically the mindset, and I would encourage anybody to check out Bettina Love um, and her abolitionist teaching network to get like a more concrete definition. But my understanding of abolitionist teaching is you are aware that there are factors in a student's life that should not be there, that are obstacles, right? Based off of who their racial identity is, right? And you are educating to help that student surmount those and dismantle them, right? Or be in a position to dismantle them. So when I think about that, right, me having that, I guess that mindset, like the kind of education these kids are going to get, they're going to be able to see themselves in what I teach and how I teach, and see others in a way that help them evolve themselves too, right? Because you need mirrors when you teach the things that people already resonate, and you also need windows, new things that
Mm.
people can understand other people with, or other experience or perspectives with, and possibly even revise and update your own. So I wanted to do that, right? But I think since I had that outlook from the beginning, the academic piece was the piece that I had to catch up with. And one of the defining moments for me was I had a student. We were like, I think we might have been reading Frederick Douglass, um, his slave narrative, and I was pulling in excerpts from other texts and to kind of correlate with this idea of slavery and not being given opportunities. They have to looking at the connection between literacy, enslavement, and incarceration,
Mm.
right? And one of the excerpts was "The New Jim Crow" by Michelle Alexander, and this young man. I invited this young man to read it, and he couldn't read it. Like legit, like he didn't have the code. He didn't understand the mechanics of the English language well enough to read it. And it wasn't like a really dense or intense section, but he couldn't read it. And I didn't have a lot of answers for that other than read it out loud for him and tell him, or try not to tell him, but kind of still telling him what the excerpt was about. And so, like, what's the point of, not what's the point, but it is extremely limiting to be told that the system has elements of it that are against you, and you can't even read it for yourself. You don't have the tools, and your teacher's not giving you the tools. They're telling you what the problem is, or they're exposing you to the problem. Maybe we can have a good conversation about the problem. But what happens when you leave the classroom and you want to read the school board notes that have a particular policy that's discriminatory, or you want to read the latest notes from the city council, or you need to read the potentially predatory mortgage loan, or you want to read the book for yourself? Right? Like, or if you want to read for joy and you want to expand your imagination, because, you know, a lot of times what you've been exposed to with literature has been limited, right? Like I wasn't giving them the code.
I think and that's so huge. Like, I think we need to pause and process that, like, huge, right? Because what you just said is I think so often our educators think social justice and equity and anti-racism is just about talking about race in schools and introducing your kids to all these amazing things, which is yes, right? Yes, challenge their thinking. Yes, critical understanding. But if they cannot make meaning of it for themselves by being able to read it, like you just said, they are still stuck in the system. They are still stuck in this cyclical, limited experiences of the ways that they can actually access information and knowledge in this world beyond just the classroom. And the classroom, because honestly, then they're struggling. And there's a direct connection between struggling students and the potential of interpretation of behaviors that then teachers also call students out on, right? So, like, I think that's huge. And I have to say that for me, you know, you mentioned working for Unbound Ed, and I will say Unbound Ed was my lightning moment, or my light bulb moment, really, because that was something for me that I think in the work that I do is been missing, is that really important key piece, is that it really is about the academic piece of, are we truly preparing our students for their futures?
Right.
And giving them agency with power. It's one thing just to give you agency, but not to give you the tools and the power to be able to access it for yourself. So I think it's huge. I just wanted to stop there because that's big. But so you're talking about the pieces of the academic. So tell me a little bit more in terms of then how that became a way for you to grow as an educator and start to emphasize that.
Yeah. I think and I'm trying to make sure that I'm using accessible language, which is hilarious now that I'm in this position, because I always hear people like, man, I wish they'd say this in plain English. But like it's a lot harder than one would imagine sometimes.
It really is.
Yeah, no, for sure. So what I did was I took instructional tools more seriously, not just instructional approaches and techniques more seriously, not just exposing them to important socio-political understandings or realities or controversies, but how am I actually going to make sure that they have access to what's being said? Am I going to pre-teach vocabulary? Am I going to do a sentence analysis? We call it juicy sentences, right? But like, am I going to chunk an excerpt? Are we going to do fluency exercises? Are we going to, and if they're English language learners, am I going to supply the audio to them the day before so they can listen to it outside of the classroom at their home or with their English learner educator in their one-to-one time. What am I going to do? How close am I going to follow the curriculum, which has a lot of these tools, to make sure that they reach an academic benchmark that I wasn't necessarily exposed to in becoming a teacher in my early days, right? So I had to make the choice to make sure that I know my pedagogical we call it pedagogical content knowledge, but basically that just means, do you know the best routes on how to make sure a student knows something with the subject you're teaching? That in the way that they're able to do it, eventually able to do it by themselves without you, exceptionally, right? So I took that more seriously, and I got more married to the curriculum. And the curriculum was not a flawless document by any means. It still had a lot of problems. It had problems and expectations, in terms of like having lower expectations, and it had problems in terms of like who was represented, what the messages in it were, et cetera, et cetera. And I still had the eye for that. I didn't ignore that eye, and I still addressed that when it came up, but I still made sure that I was my compass was evenly rigorous, relevant, and relational, right? They're being pushed to develop skills for themselves, but they're being pushed to develop skills for themselves, marrying what I'm giving them with what they already know and what they already, how they already think, in preparation for a world that they already live in, right? Like, so that's what I was trying. That was my journey, right? And I was able to refine that journey, like I would say around that point where I encountered that young man, right? Like, and I still made mistakes, and I still had successes, but it was but I would say that that's what I ended up doing, and I felt better, and as a teacher, because at the same time too, as I was learning about being a better professional, I was learning about being like a better person, and they're not. If you're in an education business, those things shouldn't be mutually exclusive.
No.
Like your pursuit of being a better person should not be independent of being a better better professional. And so, like, as all those things were climbing, but it still was very fatiguing. It still was very tiring, and I think I was probably a little more tired than I even cared to admit today. By the time I got the opportunity to work with Unbounded. Because that when I was working for before I was working for Unbounded, I left the classroom actually and did restorative practices, which I believe I did very well. However, that requires a different type of acumen socially and emotionally. That again, I'm realizing about myself, that doing this day in and day out, like adding this as a part of my instructional expertise, or doing this when on call, I can be very good at, and it won't wear me out necessarily. But if that's all I'm doing every day, like it had a unique kind of wear, because you are engaging, especially with the school building population that we had in terms of kids and the things they were going through. Like you are helping them shepherd through a lot of things that a restorative practice circle leader should help them through, but also like they're not clinicians, they're not psychologists, they're not psychiatrists, but you're being exposed to things that they would be sometimes. And to be able to, I guess, be responsible, right? Responsibly help people think through those things and come to some sort of, not a conclusion, but like to be able to feel like you're comfortably landed after sharing these things and trying to resolve a circumstance. Like that took a lot of energy, and I was very spent. And then I got reintroduced back into content through Unbounded. I love restorative practices. It's informed how I show up to this day. And I'll still help and still use those tools and help other people use them. but like doing them back to back every day as if it was like you were teaching a class, you know, like back to back classes, like back to back to back circles. It was a lot.
Those are real emotions. Those are
Yeah.
real, like those are real challenges. And I think that you know, sometimes adults discount students' experiences, but the truth of the matter is some of our students are having more adult life experiences than even the adults that they are seeing every day in their classrooms, right? And that's a lot to hold. I think truthfully, all of this work when it comes to anti-racism, equity, DEI work, whatever the label is hard work and hard work. I think we said that, right? Like it takes a toll. It is and in twofold ways. One, there's the emotional exhaustion of carrying the knowledge that there are so many kids who are not getting what they need, right?
100%.
And then there's the emotional exhaustion of and by truthfully educators that either don't know or ones that know and are harming them, but truthfully it doesn't even matter because kids are walking in and they're being harmed. School is the harmful place. And limited then their life experiences. And then there's, I think, the other piece of like just our own personal like self-care, right? And so and in this work it is really difficult because you can either feel very defeated or you know, I can say that in the last few weeks I've had a lot of moments of disillusionment of just like am I really making a difference? Like, what are we really doing? What are we really doing? Right? Like, and that is a really hard place to be as an educator, but I think particularly in anything when you're talking about trying to break through systems of oppression, right? Like, you know, anybody who works in that area or arena feels this, there's a wall you've hit.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
And so I guess for me, my question for you is like, so what do you do when that wall starts to come or when you sense that you're at that point? And how do you continue to take care of yourself? Because you talked about that. You talked about how like all of these moments, whether it was you as a student or you as a teacher in your first few years, like you have been exhausted, right? It's taken a toll on you emotionally. So how do you heal and stay whole to be able to then still continue to support the students or the adults that you're supporting right now, right, in the work that you're doing in the podcast and with Unbound Ed? What's your go-to or your ways?
So this is probably going to be all over the place because I think about the ways. I know that prayer has been one that it's always been a tool, but I feel like it's been one that's I'm learning how to use better, to reground, to restructure and reorient myself to purpose. So that's one. Two, I know in the past, actually, I remember, which I never thought I would do. There was one summer, like I forget what year it was. I straight up didn't work. Because every summer it was just like, all right, done with this school year. All right, boom, doing this Freedom School program, or boom, doing this particular study, or boom, doing it. Like it was the myth around like the teacher having the summer off. Like I really need people to understand, like there are teachers that have the summer off, so to speak, right? But most teachers that I knew, they were working just as hard or almost as hard as they were during the school year. But I took a summer off, and I was like, and I didn't do anything. Like I, stuff around the house, but I didn't do anything. And I was worried a little bit about the money and about like my purpose, so to speak. But like, what good are you to everybody else if you're not good to yourself, right? I know Audre Lorde like has like a really important quote. I don't want to misrepresent it, but she said something like, self-care is a revolutionary act. But I was trying to explore what that means, and my journey has been trying to explore what that really means, what that really looks like for me. So I know taking that summer off was a bold step for me to figure that out. I know on the average, like, prayer, exercise is becoming that, I'll be lying if I said, like, this is what I always do when I'm not there yet, Maria. One day, one day I'll get there where that's like a hyper consistent form of self-regulation. I know actually reading about other things in the profession actually helps me recalibrate, right? Like, cause just learning new things about it, because I don't feel as anxious about the one thing that I'm doing, and I can just take a break from it, still work on something related, but still different. And writing and yeah, I'll say like those things primarily. And maybe even I'm trying not to binge watch nothing, but maybe watching something on TV. Like, definitely working outside. Working outside is definitely something. Like on the weekends, like I'm barely at my computer doing anything. I'm like this weekend, like before I hopped on with you, I was at a junkyard looking for a part for my mower, right? Steve, right? Steve the Steve I work with at Unbounded. Are you familiar with him? Yeah, like he jokes because he, like, in my conversations with him, he never really realized like I'm kind of low key Hank Hill, or I try to be Hank Hill from King of the Hill, right? Like I'm always worried about like my lawn or trying to take care of something in the backyard, and I'm not like a handy person by nature, so to speak, but like learning how to be, getting into my hands and out of my head is definitely something that has been very helpful for me. Even cutting down the viney tree that kind of border up my neighbor's fence in our yard, like this afternoon, and bagging that up, mulching my leaves into the grass. Like I'm really like a lame kind of just like I MC, but like
the weekend outdoors, Home Depot trips and
I was like Lowe's and Home Depot today, both.
But I think so lame or not, right? I think like it's what relaxes you, and we got to find what works for us. I think when we try to fit ourselves into things that work for other people, it doesn't help, right? So that's a great thing that you're able to name it, know it, and live it for yourself. And so you do that, and then now you're still filling people's cups. I want to go into these podcasts just a little bit, because I think for me, I would like to know, because I believe like the way that the complexion of teaching and learning particularly, right? And you mentioned that as a limited podcast. So that one in particular, I think really connects the pieces of historical elements that have deeply been ingrained in the way our education system works, and how that's impacted particularly teachers of color, but also just our students of color, right? Like, what's that? So it's called The Complexion of Teaching and Learning. Tell me a little bit about the inception of this podcast, what it came from, what inspired it, and a little bit of what for you've gotten out of it through this process of doing it now. For it's been how many seasons do you have now?
Well, so it was kind of like a thing where it was like the only thing I can think of is like Atlanta, where like it was like 3 seasons over the course of like several years. But what's it called? It was really just like whenever work kind of permitted, or the time kind of permitted to put out an episode, we did. And so it wasn't necessarily like, multiple seasons. It was just like whenever this series is done is going to be when it's done. So there's 8 episodes. I got into it because I joined this organization, Unbounded, in a residency, and we had to have a capstone project that kind of reflected the things that we learned about our time. And I couldn't think of a better like a better way of demonstrating what I cared about before I came in the org, but also the things that I learned deeper in the org, in terms of practice, philosophy, and politics of education than what it has meant to be an educator of color over the course of the United States history leading into today, and seeing how legacy like has impacted our current day, like in terms of how we teach, ideas around like project-based learning and interdisciplinary content, like approaches, like all these things were like predispositions of like African American, African, and Native American teaching norms before there was a wide public school system, right? Like, but why is that not identified as that when we think about it now? Not only is it not identified as that, why are there so few of us? And there's a reason why there are, right? And to also the intersectional walk, because this is a multicultural nation, and when you think about how many folks of color have gone through the corridors of the United States and seeing moments where their walks were parallel and other moments where they butted heads, like the education journey is no different, right? And so kind of go through that journey to see how different ethnicities, folks of color contributed to like education, maintain their own education norms, not assimilated, but strategize on keeping them in a system that wasn't friendly to it. The losses they took, the gains that they made, it was an important story, because every teacher really needs to think about two things, like what's missing with what we do with our kids who are predominantly Black and brown in our public school system, and what's missing and who's missing. They need to be thinking about, right? So that those are things that I thought were valuable, and just to see that universe expand and discover all these authors and all these people telling these stories that I never ever got introduced to when I was training to be a teacher. And I know that the folks that provided my training did their best with what they had or what they were encouraged to do. But I was just like, I can't believe I didn't know none of this. Like, you mean to tell me there's a reason why I had a handful, not even a handful of Black teachers? You mean there's a reason? Like, there was a Brown versus Board backlash where a lot of Black teachers tens of thousands of Black teachers were let go after Brown versus Board. We're only talking about Brown versus Board like it was it was important. I don't want to get in my feelings too much, but it was, like, we only talk about one side of it, right? Like that side where this is the end of segregation in schools, but really, like, it further segregated. Not only did it segregate
demoted.
It demoted. It eliminated. It eliminated us out of the profession. And it was a very honored profession. It was a very cherished profession. It was a very innovative profession, even with all the grime and the muck of being in a Jim Crow education system. There was still a lot of beauty of what was offered, but wouldn't have known. The way it's told is like, you know what, like, y'all weren't really getting educated at all until y'all integrated with white folks. Like, it wasn't the case. And then there's a whole other story for folks who are of Mexican descent. Then there's a whole other story of folks who are of Asian descent. I cover a lot the Chinese and Japanese evolution of education in the United States. And even, like folks from the Caribbean, and Puerto Rico and Cuba and places like that. Like, it was fascinating trying to capture all that into one overarching history into contemporary experiences, and it was fun. And I think it is important for anybody invested in the public education system, but especially educators, to check out.
I would totally agree. Everybody should go. It's in the link underneath in the details. Make sure that you go and check it out. It is the podcast called The Complexion of Teaching and Learning. You definitely will learn a lot. And I think a couple of things that I want to elevate that you talked about and that I noticed about it, right, is that there is a lot of that intersection of different experiences of oppression and marginalization that aren't parallel, you're right, like, and that aren't at the same levels or the same impacts for certain, right? But there's a lot of solidarity. particularly in this episode 8 that I just listened to, that you have a lot of different perspectives of the solidarity, of the commonality between these the communities, you know, whether it's the African American community and the literacy societies that were in those, or the indigenous communities and their historical and storytelling and connections between the ways that they were, you know, they educated their children, right? And that alignment is so huge, because I think a lot of times we are in a battle between groups of people in almost the oppression Olympics, right? And it becomes so problematic in the way that we approach education, because now, rather than finding commonalities and finding common ground and working together, we're working against each other oftentimes, and working for the same results but at different places. And it's like, my boss has this great description of, like, there's this giant boulder and we're all pushing it, but we're all pushing it from different sides, and it's not going up the hill, right? So I think that's a big, powerful piece to me that I pulled away from the podcast, is your intentionality with bringing in so many different voices across the board of those experiences, to recognize that the marginalization of schools and the way that school systems have been set up historically has not been to benefit any of these minoritized groups, right? They're not minorities, but they're minoritized, for certain. And there's been an impact. So every educator should go and definitely check it out. We're coming to almost the end, but I want to go back to your video. Because I think, you know, for me, I want to know a little bit behind your Are You MAGA video, which is what we started off with earlier, and a little bit of how to you that connects to the work you're doing with this systemic racism in the school system. Like, do you see an alignment and connection, and where that is for you?
I think the things that have happened in the past 4 years are an indictment of the American education system. When I think about the tribalism and the lack of nuanced thinking around big issues, whether we're talking COVID, whether we're talking about Trump's election, whether we're talking about Ukraine, like the inability to think in the shades of gray and critically think about everything that's going on. The things that are convenient for our beliefs and the things that are inconvenient of our beliefs are an indictment of the American education system. The American education system is supposed to help you become an independent, it should help you become an independent thinker, right? A self-motivated, independent learner and thinker, right? Ideally, yes. But I think so much of what was going on, you know, the song is called How You MAGA. However, the commentary, and I think I kind of sum it up in the beginning of the remix. I said MAGA was MAGA before it was MAGA, right? Yes, Trump is Trump, from my perspective, actually just got done talking with a student about the legacy of Trump, and we had slightly varying differences about it, but we were able to have a nuanced conversation about it, which is what you're supposed to do. You know, but we haven't been, on average, we haven't been equipped to do so. But it is my belief that, like, you know, Trump was the most egregious representation of what's always been true. You know, I don't know how familiar you are with like Batman and the characters, and like how it's, you know, the Joker is like a Batman villain, right? And then they're set in Gotham, right? Gotham City. And the remix, I say Trump is the Joker, but Gotham's still Gotham without him. It made him. How could it disavow him? Right? Like this othering of what the things that Trump did and said, which were a problem. But like, for us to pretend like, you know, we didn't create that monster ourselves, like American culture didn't create that craziness itself. and there aren't other varieties. Like there are smoother versions of Trump on both sides of the political aisle. And so that's kind of where I was thinking as well, where like, you know, I don't trust, me personally, like I have to treat with a critical eye both sides of the political aisle, you know. So to tie back to again the education, that's where I landed with my criticality, right? And you know, some other people may land in a different space, but that's okay. But we should be able to talk about it and express it with credibility, because we should have got the training to do so in the 12 years we spent in the American education system.
Which is so full circle, because right, that's exactly it. That it's the power to be able to think critically and consciously and make determinations of things for ourselves, because we can't accept just things as they are. We have to question them, and we have to develop and build our students to be able to do that. But we've got to build our teachers to know how to do that for 100%. Our students, right? Like, so it's all connected. It's all, you know, brought together. And I love the video. Like, I think, you know, again, you're a dope MC, but also, you know, you have done a great job of connecting all these pieces through your different creative outlets, of whether it's the podcast or it's your music, or it's through the work you do with Unbound Ed. And I didn't say it at the beginning, but y'all, Brqandon is amazing in Unbound Ed, and I have to say I had the honor of having him as my coach in probably the hardest week ever I've had in this job. So, you know, and he is right. He's great at helping grow adults and their skills and their knowledge, and then through that helping students, right? So today's episode was really that, right? It was all about this idea of what's wrong with our education system and how are we going to fix it. And so Brandon White, thank you so much, Brandon, for coming on, because I think that what you've done is given us so many tools, so many ideas, and so many processes to think about how to start to do that through, you know, building our own knowledge, but also, you know, kind of recognizing, I loved it, you put the 3 trifectas together: the relationships, the rigor, and the relevance. And the power of those 3 things in our classrooms, if we are educators, or the power of those in understanding that if you're a parent and you have a kid in school, right, like this is what you want. And this is why. It's not just because we want to talk about race in schools, which is important, but it really is about the tools for every kid who walks into a classroom, whether it's kindergarten or 12th grade. They are walking out being empowered with the agency of knowledge and knowing how to use that knowledge to transform and change their own lives.
100%.
And I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate your commitment. I know you had,
Oh, I just want to say, like, in terms of your leadership as well, like, and I'm glad I was able to help in that moment you were referring to, but one has to be receptive and ready to do that. And you were very receptive and very thoughtful, which I think, again, going back to education, like, in order to be a good teacher, you got to be like willing to learn. And even if you have high expertise, which you do have very high expertise in teaching, like well, I don't want to nerd out too much because I don't want to end up talking in you know, like jargon, but you know, I appreciate how you showed up before that moment, how you showed up during that moment, and how you're showing up now is very consistent, you know, in terms of your just general orientation around hearing self, hearing others, and seeking healing, right? Like all these scenarios and circumstances represent like a consistency that I appreciate. And it's really important for us to have that in the education space, because like, I think this is before the pandemic, 58%, according to the AFT, 58% of teachers reported in the study reported poor mental health, over half. And
that's
shows like
pandemic.
this. Yeah, this is before. Like, so shows like this, I know this is well beyond educators, right? But like shows like this can help us really like push ourselves to get what we need for ourselves. So thank you for having me on and for everything that you do.
Oh, thanks, Brandon. I really appreciate that. And I mean that is my goal. You know, I think for me, honestly, you know, this journey has been one where when I didn't think I was going to have a podcast, I mean, when I met you in 2020, right? Like that was not at all a thought. But you know, I have this platform now, and I have to say shout out to my producer, John Logic, because he gave me the opportunity. He's the one who brought me here. And to me, it is an opportunity to help others heal. Whether it's talking about education, which is my passion, yes, but also I think honestly, it's something all of us are somehow connected to in some way or another. Whether we were students once, we are educators, we have children that are in the school system, or we're community members who are getting those students coming out of school, right, in our workforces. And I think like, and it is doing it collectively. So I am always honored when I get to meet really dope people and connect with them and bring them into the space and bring them onto the show and have them share their stories. And I think we froze a little bit there. I see Brandon. I don't know if you froze. And so I truly appreciate you being on here and being able to share your story. And so as we start to close out for today, I'm going to go ahead and I think Brandon might have left us. I think he froze. But I want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to my Ranters Union for watching this. And of course, I'm sure pulling up in the chat and sharing your thoughts. Thank you to anybody else who is in the audience and watching. Please make sure that you like, you share, you comment, go and follow Brandon on his podcast. Definitely tune in to this show every Sunday at 9 o'clock for more episodes of Pain to Power Leading with Love and more interesting guests who are sharing their stories of how they have taken pain and turned it into power and led with love. And I think Brandon's back with us. So I'm going to bring him back in. Oh, sorry. I'm going to bring him back in. Hey, yes. I think you froze and left, but you're here. We were just closing out. Any final words for our educators, for our audience, for whomever, before we close out?
Final words are just thank you, Maria. Looking forward to checking out Brown Girl Interrupting from this point forward. How You MAGA can be found on YouTube. It actually got nominated for 3 film awards in terms of the video. Shout out to Lava the Fresh Nerd. And thank you for all the work that you're doing and pushing folks to get healed, or not even pushing, inviting them to be healed.
I love it. And thank you so much. And again, yeah, all the links are down below in the description. So make sure you click on them, go check out Brandon, check out his show, check out everything. And definitely go click on this link up here. If you haven't done it yet, Brandon, I don't know if you've read any of my pieces, but I am a writer. I'm a blogger. That was where I started.
No. Remember we tried to use one of your pieces? There we go. Yeah. When did you use one of your pieces for the Unbounded stuff?
You did. That wasn't my blog pieces, but that was actually, and I have to say, I don't know, I share with the audience that awesome moment. I have to say, Brandon, I don't know if you know how shocked I was. I was sitting in a training and they're like, we've got this article that we're using for our Unbounded training. And I saw the title and I was like, oh, that looks familiar. I think I've read it before. That looks familiar. And then you said, because I'm sitting in this Zoom meeting and then you're like, it's one of our own, Maria Hay. And I was like, wait. That's me. That's my article.
Yep.
But it was an honor, like a prolific honor for me to be a part of the content that is shared nationwide with all these teachers that come to Unbound Ed through the virtual learning that they've been doing over the last, it was like 2 years almost.
Yeah, I was like 2 going on 3. It's kind of crazy. Time flying.
I mean, that's awesome. So I was honored to have had my writing chosen for that. So in addition to that was like my academic writing on culturally responsive teaching. But up here is my link to my blog, which is more about healing and learning and love and relationships and parenting and just about the whole gamut of everything. I recently wrote a post called Awakening to the Games He Played. I also have written some other posts. There's just a range of many things. So please go check it out. Make sure you follow, make sure you subscribe, put your email in, and comment, like, share, pass it along, all the good things. And follow me on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all of it. And definitely follow Brqandon on YouTube on Instagram as well. So all of the information is below in the details. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you again to Ja, my producer, who's amazing, and to Brqandon for being an amazing guest and for being here with us today. So thank you and have a beautiful night. Peace, love, and light.
Peace, peace.
My world has slowly crumbled around me countless times, and every time I rebuild with the pieces I've been given to birth something so transformational and beautiful that no one else knew might exist before it was shown to them. These moments tend to coincide within my romantic path. The universe has been telling me to focus on the revolution and not romance. It has over time given me the tools, resilience, and light to turn my pain into power. And only now do I see that the key to this always resided in the love and knowing I had in myself, not from the external sources of family or men. The message I have been avoiding might be that my time in this world I had existed in was not to receive love, but to put it out there for others to see, feel, and heal through. Revolution before romance moves pain into power.